Okay, we're recording.
All right. Do you want to kick it off?
I can.
Man, I'm telling you, I'm pretty excited about this.
Yeah. This. So, hey guys, welcome back to Resiliency Rounds.
Season 2.
What's that?
Season 2.
Season 2. Yeah. So we have basically the point of our discussion today is to talk about future directions.
Yep.
And sort of the content of what we intend to cover in this next iteration of the podcast. Yeah. So do you want to describe a little bit what we're about to embark upon? Because this is not a small task.
Oh no.
This is quite an endeavor.
Yeah. So that's a good way to start. Let's talk about. I mean, you're just like straight to business, man.
Let's just do it. We're gonna cut straight to the bone, man.
I thought you were gonna give a little bit about why it took us so long to get here, Yeah. But no. So we first season 1. First of all, thank you for all those folks who listened to the podcast and stuck through with us. There are a lot of like hard hitting, heavy stuff. We were recording. Very regularly. We're reading quite a bit, and all this was. I have to say that this past year, it's changed the way I think. I know, Eddie, it changed the way you think about a lot of different things, not just work, just life in general. Purpose is a big part of what we discussed in season 1, and we were living it as we were going through it, and it has been a year of change for me in many ways. But it also has been a year where I've actually put into practice all of the stuff that we spoke about.
Yep.
And I can say that I learned so much this past year. When we started season 1, we were like, it's all about, resiliency comes from within, and there's no role for the system in this. And, and then, we knew somewhere along the way that there is a little bit of the system and there's a little bit of individuality and there's a mismatch there. But as we've gone along, we've realized there's so much more to this. And that one of the biggest takeaways from all of this has been that we are, my dog is here. Grand entrance. Well, so one of the biggest takeaways for me has been this past year, at least realizations, I should say, is that we are not alone. And humans cannot find wellness or mindfulness by just trying to duke it out alone. We are a social animal. We are like ants with a conscience. And we have to dedicate our lives to the common good. And season 1 was all about that. How does one take one's life, one that is so individualistic, from the time you're born, you're told you're special. Something, your experience is yours, you're unique. And it's all about you, your dreams, your desires, your achievements. And we follow that path as physicians, to reach this pinnacle of training of life in general.
Right. The achievement focus.
The achievement focus, right? And we do that, and we get here, and then we realize the emptiness of that path, this path of, self-serving, individualistic path. And so then if it's not for oneself, then for whom are you working? And then everybody says, it's family. I have a wife and I have kids. And so now I have to dedicate my life to them. And that's fine. It's fine. But that we have realized essentially is duty. That is not purpose. You cannot say that my purpose in life is to do my duty. Duty happens. There's stuff going on in the background too.
Just as you say, duty happens. The plates crash to the floor.
Plates are crashing to the floor. But
I mean, the point that you're trying to make is that the idea with duty is that it's an obligation, right?
Correct.
So if it's a truly intrinsic commitment, it's something that you would expect of yourself anyway,
Correct.
Right? And so there's this sense in terms of a higher purpose or an aim in life that demands it to be supererogatory, which is the word that you could use, meaning it sort of rises above and beyond obligation. And
correct.
that brings into the question is what aims are worthy of that type of commitment.
And I think there has to be a choice, right? We discussed this in season 1 too, where a decision that is based on moral obligation, right? Duty is not one of those.
Right.
Okay. So we have to pause this, I think, because of the kids in the background.
Yeah, it's okay.
It's okay. But we can at least close that door in the back.
Yeah. I mean, you can do some minor editing. So the beauty of this is that with GarageBand, it's very easy to...
Well, it's fine. I think even if it's in there, it doesn't matter. It doesn't bother me anymore. But point I was trying to make is that if it's duty, there is no choice in there. There's no choice between good and evil, and one has to kind of do their duty, and that duty is towards family. That's duty. One cannot use that as purpose. And when we talk about purpose, we talk about making a moral choice, making a choice between good and evil. I mean, that was our last episode that we ended on. That is the big problem here. How does one know what is good and what is evil?
Yeah.
Right. And the difference between good and evil, to know that, to understand that, is wisdom.
Right.
And one has to have wisdom in order to be able to kind of navigate all of such decisions for not just immediately. It's not like we make this decision once and we know that this was a good decision right now. It has to be a good decision for posterity, forever. And that is where wisdom lies. And it's impossible to know that.
Right.
But within the realm of human life, how does one make those decisions which they are making with the best opinion that they have, the truest, best opinion that they have? And in what direction should they be aiming? That is the purpose of season 2. Season 2 is not that we have kind of laid some of this framework. Season 2 is going to allow us to make some of those decisions, how best to make it based on examples of people in the past and based on this intellectual heritage that we have that comes from 2,000 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the, you were talking about the effect of the pandemic. It's sort of unmasked a lot of hidden, I think, deficiencies system-wide, but I think for a lot of people, it obviously put them under a lot of strain. And so in terms of the attention and the awareness given to burnout, I think that became acutely highlighted during the pandemic.
Yeah, you're right.
And so there was a lot of discussion about that. And from my perspective, it really reinforced the things that we had explicitly and implicitly talked about in season 1. And in fact, we directly had an episode where we talked about, virtue in the face of the pandemic. Mm-hmm. Again, with virtue being this idea of it's a system of thought and action in the direction toward what is best for that particular situation. So this habit of determining what the right action is in certain domains in life, in particular as it pertains to risk, which is where courage would come in, as it pertains to how you comport yourself with other people or the rules that govern the interactions between yourself and other people, that would be justice. And then decisions that you take upon yourself about how you handle, the balances between the things that you do out of pleasure and the things that you do to sort of withhold from that as temperance. And then finally, what you were getting at, which is where you have using the powers of reasoning to determine from a certain situation, what is going to be the best next step in a certain situation as it pertains to avoiding the potential pitfalls that you could call evil, or optimizing things either for your good or the greater good, which would be decisions that you could consider right action.
Correct.
And so that the pandemic, I think, really essentially validated that, but it also made me realize that is an incomplete picture too, because one of the issues with philosophy is that it gives you broad guidelines because it's concerned. So what I was saying is that the pandemic validated in my mind this idea of virtue as something that is the best aim for thought and action. Especially in times of crisis like the pandemic. But what I was trying to say is that in a way it gives you an incomplete picture because philosophy is really concerned with universals and it's concerned with the essences of things. And so it's one thing to describe and discover and explore the essences of virtue, their qualities, but it's something else entirely to put them into practical use on a day-to-day basis, especially in the midst of a crisis. And so what I learned was that it's not that easy. I mean, it's it's not that easy at all. And the value of virtue as an ideal is, again, it gives you an aiming point, but you still need tools. You need practical wisdom. You need practical tools for how to navigate the challenges and obstacles that happen day to day. One of the things that we talked about was this idea of burnout and moral injury. So, with burnout being this issue that occurs amongst all healthcare workers, but really any worker in any field would be susceptible to moral injury, which is really a syndrome, a condition that's characterized by emotional exhaustion or depletion, a feeling of low self-worth or low accomplishment. And then there's some sort of
depersonalization,
right? Depersonalization involved with it too. So it really affects the identity at one level.
Yeah.
And that's something that's really an expected result of a situation where somebody is actually trying to overcome overwhelming odds, either due to external forces or internal forces, frankly, is the way you could describe it. But then there's a second component to it too, which is where you had this idea of moral injury as the potential source.
So hold on. So that what you talk about essentially is the components of burnout, correct?
Right.
Yeah,
those are the components of burnout. But then there's a second related issue that could be described as moral injury, which is this idea of, when you feel like you're having to make decisions between things that are both apparent goods, or if you feel forced to make decisions that violate your own sense, your own ethical code or your own professional code. And I think the pandemic put a lot of people in situations where they felt like they were having to do that. They were having to cut corners either to get rescue some semblance of the best possible outcome, given the limitations of resources and the negative circumstances surrounding it, or they were actually just being outright told to cut corners. And many providers or healthcare workers felt like the cutting of the corners violated their primary aim, which is to always put the patient first. But under ideal circumstances, that line is easy to define. But when resources get constrained, when people's emotional reserves get constrained, that line begins to be blurred. And what that does is it causes people to make decisions that could later, you could say, regret. And it sort of festers on itself a little bit.
Yeah.
And so the idea of moral injury, ironically, is that the perpetrator of the moral injury, meaning the person who makes the decision for whatever reason, internal or external factors, to cut corners, is also the perpetrator, but also the sufferer of moral injury. And there's a debate right now going on in medicine whether burnout is really burnout or moral injury is actually the root cause of all this. So the relationship between burnout and moral injury is still something that I think still needs to be anatomized and colorized with further investigation. But the bottom line is that this pandemic really pointed out that we need to understand both of these entities better. And you and I think, have the understanding that there is going to be a lot that philosophy has to say about how to navigate this dynamic, because it's not unique to physicians.
Yeah.
These are human sufferings.
Yeah.
And there's, brilliant minds have contemplated these issues before. And so the second season is really going to be about walking through what we can learn from, moral and ethical philosophy.
Yeah. Yeah. I think season 1, you're right. It tackled more of this burnout issue early on.
Right.
I think some of our early episodes were about just resiliency and how to square away big issues that impact someone's life from an individualistic perspective.
Yeah.
Things like money.
Right.
You got to make sure that you have your finances in order before you embark on this, view of the common good. Otherwise, it's not that is a prerequisite. It's just that our lives and this contemporary life is such that money is of importance. And then once you've been able to make some good money decisions, then the next thing is the most important commodity that we have is time. It's, and then once you have the money squared away, then you got to start building up on time. And once you have the time, then you can now start contemplating, because you need time to introspect,
right?
Time to look at the condition around you, time to understand, burnout and, moral injury. Moral injury, I think you brought it up now, and which it's a fascinating concept. I used to use the term moral injury a lot. And then when I, realized that what I thought of what moral injury was, I used to equate the two. I used to equate burnout and moral injury all the time. And I realized that burnout is more of an emotional state. Moral injury is more of rational thinking. It's gotten me to a point where I've started respecting moral injury a lot.
Yeah, and then just to complicate matters even further, resiliency is something else that seems to have a mysterious relationship to the two, because you can have a high degree of resiliency and still burn out, and you can have a high degree of resiliency and still be suffering with moral injury.
I think the first statement, maybe I don't agree with. Like, you can have a high degree of resiliency and burnout. I don't think that may be the case. What I mean by that essentially is that if you truly are resilient, you've actually built all the subsystems needed. It's unlikely, but you may be highly resilient, but you may have moral injury down the line if you're not careful.
Yeah, so a lot of it depends on what you define as resiliency.
Correct.
Too. So that I should point that out, because I would say that you and I have a different definition of resiliency than the one you would find in the extant literature on this topic. Yeah. And in fact, I think in previous episodes, we may or may not have, but I have vaguely remember using the term authentic resiliency to distinguish it from what you find in most research papers. But to the extent that we're talking about authentic resiliency, absolutely. Authentic resiliency, the resiliency that we would strive for would presumably, yes, have a protective effect against the things that would even lead on the path to burnout to begin with. In fact, you would avoid that path altogether if you had authentic resiliency to the way we describe it. But anyway, you were talking about moral injury, yeah.
Well, no, so it's a fascinating concept, and I think we have to be very careful that we don't struggle with moral injury. And that is something that is a lot more difficult than burnout to deal with. Because in order to, and we'll talk about moral injury down the line, but you brought it up already, so I guess there's a little bit of an introduction there. It is more of a systemic issue. And duty could put you directly in line with moral injury. So, then this brings us back to the question of, the duty and obligation and purpose. One could be part of a war as a soldier, and the war is being orchestrated by a despot. Now, the soldier doesn't have a say in what he's doing. He's getting orders. He's doing his duty. And that the acts committed in this unjust war, which people could argue all wars are unjust, but this soldier now has to contend with what he has done in the line of duty.
Right.
And under the instruction of somebody that is hierarchically above him, and he is trained to follow those orders. And now that has brought him face to face that he has to commit an act, either burn down a village or kill innocents or, harm prisoners of war, torture, or whatever he has to do. He has to now live with that and contend with it.
Right. And that just points out the fact that it just nicely points out the fact that duty and the moral aims of action have nothing to do with one another, which is precisely the point, which is why, I was just following orders doesn't work as a defense. Because there is underneath all of this a sense that most of us have of morality, of an ethical framework, an idea of what human solidarity should look like. And to the extent that you violate those, whether, again, and I use external versus internal factors, but you could say duty-oriented actions and non-duty-oriented actions. However the case, whenever you violate that sense, whether it's, carrying out an unlawful order to execute an unarmed prisoner, or whether you stroll past somebody who's hanging by their fingernails on a cliff and you just don't help them, that's going to have an impact. That's going to negatively impact your sense of well-being. And that's because, as you point out, we are social creatures.
That's correct.
And so there's these are extreme examples that were just to use for illustrative purposes, but there's micro versions, there's species of these types of injuries that we're just
micro and macro.
The micro and macro again. But there's like micro injuries. I mean, there's subspecies of these types of injuries that we encounter in the practice of medicine all the time. And the question is
this is a great point. So coming back to the point at hand, the dog's back. He makes this grand entrance, bangs the door open. So coming back to the point at hand, is that the duty then is not just of the soldier. We always talk about moral injury, and even if you look at the data on moral injury, it's all about soldiers and act of war.
Right, that's where it all started.
He's like breathing into your microphone. Yeah. And so but moral injury can also occur in healthcare fields. Yeah. As a matter of fact, any field that has human services involved, from firemen to policemen to physicians, and it is important for us to determine where our moral injury is. Before we go about trying to, from a physician's standpoint, we have to be sure that we know where our moral injury lies. If not, we run the risk of saying that we are burnt out, and then someone telling us that, you need some mindfulness training, you need to do some meditation, or, you need your call structures to be changed, you need to reduce your clinical load and things like that. And voila, your burnout will be all sorted out. And I can tell you from personal experience that one can go down this path of mindfulness, physical exercise, meditation, reading, philosophy, spending time with friends, doing all of those things, and still at the end of it, being wrought with this anxiety of, where is this going? Where am I going? And when you struggle with it, you realize that despite the fact that you have kind of dealt with this burnout issue, developed some resiliency, you have not tackled the biggest problem at hand is, are you participating in the common good?
Right. Go ahead. I don't mean to cut you off, but you coined it, and the coinage was flawless. That one episode when you ask yourself, what is the moral impact of the work that I do?
That's correct.
And that speaks to the heart of the issue. Because, again, this is why I suspect that burnout and moral injury are two totally different things. Mm-hmm. Because self-care, all of these self-care initiatives that have been adopted and implemented in various institutions, they probably will address burnout. But the sense of dread, the sense of dissatisfaction that many healthcare workers, burnout may only account for part of that issue. Mm-hmm. And I suspect that the reason it's still pervasive, even amongst people who have high rates of the research-defined categories of resiliency, is because what's not been looked at adequately is this idea of moral injury. And so, to me, this brings me to the rationale of season 2. Mm-hmm. Well, if you have an injury to your moral structure, in order to understand how that can have such a negative impact on your own quality of life, you would do well then to understand what are the foundations of your moral obligation, your sense of morality, your ethical sense. Is there a way to develop that to do two things? First, to at least give you some consolation as you navigate the struggles of life when you are faced with moral dilemmas, but more importantly, to give you guidance on how to take action, to give you guidance on how to move your better developed sense of ethics, and how do you turn that into action that actually does increase the moral impact of the work you do. Mm-hmm. And I think that's going to be the focus of season 2.
So that, coming back to the key words, the words you use, the foundations of moral obligation, right? I see how nicely you inserted that in there. That's very nice, man. That? So coming back to, what is season 2 about then is understanding that we have a big task at hand. Because one physician very easily would say, yeah, I mean, what are you talking about? My actions are moral, and I participate in the common good. I'm a physician, for Christ's sake. Mm-hmm. And so, and we have found out that that's not necessarily true. If you work in corporatized healthcare, you have to ask yourself, what is the ultimate aim of the work that you do? Is it profit? Is it health? And U.S. healthcare system, it's something that we have to kind of talk about, what is the aim? Is the aim profit? Is the aim health? And health for whom? Is it health for all? Is it health for some? Health for those who can pay? You have to ask yourself those questions. And when you start asking yourself those questions, then you come to the point of maybe what I do does not participate in the common good. It participates in some good. And then some could roll their eyes and say, that's enough for me. I'm not trying to be Nelson Mandela. I'm trying to be just this regular guy. I have a family and I have a life and I want to do this. But I can, based on what I've heard, based on what I've read, based on the experience, based on the books, based on our discussions, based on discussions with other people, that way of thinking of, I participate in some good, I'm good, I'm going to be fine, I can live with myself, it's going to come back to bite us down the line. There is going to be moral injury. And the later on in life we come face to face with moral injury, the worse it's going to be. We like to think of our life as this entire continuous spectrum from the time that we were born to the time that we're going to die. But all we have in common is that one day, that day of your death is the only thing you share with everybody else who's alive. And you've got to look at your life based on that one particular day or maybe a few days around. But point I'm trying to make is the sooner you participate in the common good, the easier it is to look at one's life as a life well lived, as the good life. Right? So coming back to then season 2. So this is about moral injury. This is about foundations of moral obligation. But at the end of it, this is also about the good life.
Right, because they're inextricably linked.
Correct. And one's good life is everyone's good life. The more people who start thinking like this, start participating in the common good, that is the world that we want to be living in. That's the world that I want my kids and my grandkids to live in. But so where does the foundation of moral obligation come in? So this was a course that was developed, like we said, moral injury, duty, doing acts in the line of duty and making sacrifices. This is all, soldiering, and so the army, the navy, the air force comes face to face with these issues all the time, and they have to draw on the experiences of those in the past and the present to determine what it's going to be like.
Specifically, in the care of veterans,
especially in the care of veterans who've been through it or who are actively going through it. So the Foundation of Moral Obligation course is a course that's taught in the U.S. Naval War College. It is one of their top courses, and Admiral Stockdale is the one who actually started that course. Now, we don't have enough time to kind of go through all of that. I think we could probably dedicate an episode to that. Maybe when we start first episode, maybe we can talk about the course.
Yeah, but suffice it to say that what it is it's basically a curriculum of texts. You can consider them, it's a very selective cohort from what you could call the great books of Western civilization. But they are the ones that pertain specifically to ethical frameworks of thought.
That's correct.
And moral philosophy.
Very well said.
And again, the idea here is just, to follow the analogy of clinical care. In order to understand and effectively treat an injury, you must understand the anatomy and physiology of the underlying structure. Yeah. Therefore, to understand and prevent moral injury, it would make complete sense to completely and effectively, thoroughly, discreetly, clearly anatomize the structure of your moral framework. And so I think most people would be surprised by the fact that their sense of what's right to do in a particular situation is, broadly speaking, going to be in accordance with convention. But there's so many biases. If anything, it's taught us this. If we've learned anything from this, the issues with implicit bias and the issues with sort of the siloing that happens when people sort of compartmentalize where they get their information from and pass judgments off of inaccurate or incomplete information, it just sort of demonstrates how flawed and hazardous a lot of the moral decisions that we make can be. So the way around that then is to build the anatomic structure of your moral framework and
give you the ability to use rational thought,
right,
to come up with the answer of this particular thing that I'm going to do. Is this good or not?
Right. And if it's good, then it's clear, right? So this is the guidance benefit of philosophical reading. But then if it's not good, it gives you the wherewithal, to identify it, and then, frankly, to call it out. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, this is where the philosophy fundamentally is a call to action. Philosophical understanding that never leaves the mind is completely useless. It's when it moves from the realm from thought to action, that is when you actually reap the benefit that rational thought provides.
Yes,
so that's the idea.
That's what practical wisdom, like you said before, was. And so the it's not that at the end of this course one just suddenly starts making rational decisions, or one is on the path to virtue. One still has to then take what they have learned and put it into action. But before we can put anything into action, we first have to understand it, and that is the role of the course. And the course is, like you said, a series of texts, but just reading them alone and not discussing them with anybody doesn't give you the full breadth. It's like you said, like Mortimer Adler says, reading alone is like drinking alone.
Reading alone is like drinking alone, right?
That's right.
So,
and I've figured that out for myself. Like, I read something, and then when we discuss it, I get a whole different perspective of it. Or sometimes you may not get a different perspective, but you get to sharpen the knife. You and me go at it and we have a discussion, and we're like, okay, this helps me make my arguments better. And it's almost like a sounding board. It's like an echo chamber. When you say something and it comes back and hits you in the face, and you're like, yeah, man, I don't live my life according to what I just said we should be living our life like. Yeah. So our hope is that we're going to take resiliency rounds, and we are going to create a conversation where we are going to discuss these books, these chapters.
Yeah, so the ambitious goal that we have is essentially to take the long walk through the foundations of moral obligation. And, at a micro level, what we hope to accomplish is a very thorough dissection analysis of the components of the material that we're going to be reading, followed by vigorous discussion about the ideas. Hopefully we'll have some disagreements because it'll make it more interesting, and then we can sharpen our swords, as you say. But either way, the goal is to have a completely free exchange in this jurisdiction of ideas, because in that process, that's where reasoning really becomes the cemented foundation that it needs to be.
The other thing I wanted to add essentially is that the reason why the Foundation of Moral Obligation course through the Resiliency Rounds is going to be focused on medical ethics a little bit.
Right. It'll be contextualized to the life and challenges that face healthcare
workers. Face a physician as opposed to a soldier.
Right.
But yes, the stakes may be different, but those stakes still exist, and they're pretty high.
They're high nonetheless. Right.
Correct. And so yes, so you were saying.
Yeah. Actually, I think I finished my point.
You finished your point. Good. Okay. So that's our hope with Resiliency Rounds in season 2. It's no small task.
This is a long reading list. This is very thorough. So it's going to be the robust and the gritty amongst you that will follow us all the way through. But we hope that enough of you follow us along that by the end of it, we will have come through with a more developed, sort of a more muscular sense of internal fortitude.
That's what we hope. I can say for myself, after going through the curriculum, pretty much, I've finished it, I guess, I have a little bit left, but it has changed the way I think a lot, many different ways. It is very powerful. And what's in there is, when you read it, for me, it seems plain as day. Though in my experience, I've found that I've had these discussions with others about it, and it turns out that others have different opinions about the same subject matter. But once we discuss, everybody comes to the same page. It is amazing to see. It's a great process. We will leave the curriculum so that if folks are inclined, they can actually buy the books, and the books
and
are
follow along.
Follow along. The books are. You say it's a tall order, but it's actually not that much. The only one that's really long in there actually is the Republic.
It's doable.
It's doable, right? Definitely doable, and and at least the initial few chapters are actually very easy reads, and they're very short reads. One can easily do them, and there's some that are longer and require you to kind of power through. But I can say for myself, I found myself to be really motivated to go through it. Once you start reading it, you're like, man, it puts into perspective so many things.
Yeah, absolutely.
Routine things when you start thinking about them differently. It's beautiful.
Yeah.
But I'll provide the reading list, and then we'll start going through it. We'll try and get these episodes out as often as we can. Life has come in the way for both of us in this past year. It's been an interesting year.
We've persevered. We've adhered to some degree of success to our Stoic ideals. So
you more than me, my friend. You're much more of a Stoic than I am. And I have to say, Elie, that I have to congratulate you. And you've had some stuff this past year, and you've actually powered through it. So what I'm trying to say essentially is that this stuff works.
Yeah.
This stuff works, and I'm glad I came upon this. I'm glad I came upon you, and we came upon this together. Our lives are obviously affected by this in a very positive way. But it's not easy.
Yeah.
It's not that once you get down this path, it's all smiles and high fives and a great life. No, there are struggles.
Well, that's the deal, right? I mean, with philosophy, it's all about the blunt and bloody questions, as I say it. And any, just like, again, the medical analogies are rife when we have these discussions, but, a thorough examination is what's required often in order to fully understand what's going on. And self-examination is, one of the hardest things to do because you're partially blinded by your own biases. And sometimes you need a second set of eyes to call out things that you may not have identified.
Yeah.
And the great thing is that process can be mediated through a collaborator. But you can also lean on the work done by these great minds that have thought about these issues and really give you the framework for examining your own, again, moral framework. And the reason why that's important is because that's inextricably linked with your well-being.
With the good life.
Right.
And
living the good life.
Yeah. We have to also caution folks that the aim for reading this is actually not to critique the author. Critiquing Plato is not the point here. I don't think we can do that even.
Yeah, go ahead.
But I don't think that anybody who can actually critique Plato's work. But what I'm trying to say is that, just listen to the argument that's being made. It is not easy to wrap your head around the common good. Because, it's so easy to say the common good. But when it comes to universal happiness, it is very difficult to define. It is unachievable.
Yeah.
But just because something is unachievable doesn't mean that we should not pursue it.
All right.
And so, I'm encouraging everybody to just stick with us as we discuss these topics. Yes, one has to be a little bit idealistic. One has to be on one end of the spectrum when we're talking about it. Some of these ideas sound grandiose, but it doesn't diminish their relevancy. And that's the challenge, because the initial reaction to an unachievable goal is that it's either not relevant or not worth pursuing if it's not achievable. Yeah. But what human endeavor is, what human endeavor was undertaking with a guarantee that it was going to succeed. And the best ones are the ones where you had no idea. That's correct. And yet you reached out. There's nothing more human than that. That's right. That's the pinnacle of being human. Yeah. That's correct. All right. So I think for us, time is kind of running out for the introduction episode. We don't want to shame Seneca, so we're going to. Yeah. But this was good. I think in the show notes, I'll try and see if I can get the curriculum put down there. Yeah, and we'll be identifying the reading list more explicitly, obviously, in further episodes too. But the show notes will have everything, all the information that's necessary. So yeah, and Hector gets some credits. We'll give. We'll give participation, cast credit to the Hector, the German Shepherd. Heavy breathing onto the mic. Right. He provided the heavy breathing and the bursting in through the doors. Right. The ill-timed interruptions, just to make it interesting. Yeah. Such is life. Such is life. All right, man. Okay. That's good.